If you guys haven't heard, HBO has released some information on one of the prequel Game of Thrones shows under development. HBO first had 4 different groups coming up with some spin-off stories, and finally they ordered one of them to have a pilot episode made. Let me read out their statement on it, then I'll get into George Martin's response to it. Set thousands of years before the events of Thrones, the project chronicles the world's descent from the golden age of heroes into its darkest hour. Only one thing is for sure, from the horrifying secrets of Westeros' history to the true origin of the White Walkers, the mysteries of the East to the Starks of legend, it's not the only story we think we know. The statement is pretty short, but there's enough we can take away from it to know what to expect from this spin-off. But first, let me read the author of the books, George Martin's response to this news. After more than a year of development, HBO has greenlit the first of the Game of Thrones successor shows that we've been working on, scripted by the amazing Jane Goldman. To clarify, what we have here is a pilot order, not as yet a series order, though of course we're all hoping that will follow. Yes, this is a prequel, not a sequel. None of the characters or actors from Game of Thrones will appear in the new show. All of the successor shows we've been developing have been prequels, as I have mentioned before. This one really puts the pre in prequel, since it's set not 90 years before Game of Thrones, like Dunk and Egg, or a few hundred years, but rather 10,000 years, while assuming the oral histories of the first men are accurate. But there are maesters at the Citadel who insist it has only been half that long. We're very early in the process, of course, with the pilot order just in, so we don't have a director yet, or a cast, or a location, or even a title. My vote would be The Long Night, which says it all, but I'd be surprised if that's where we end up. More likely, HBO will want to work the phrase Game of Thrones in there somewhere. We'll know sooner or later. We do have a showrunner, Jane Goldman, who penned the pilot script. George Martin has brought up Dunk and Egg a few times in the past year because it was his choice for a prequel spin-off. He's written 3 short stories about their adventures, but I don't know if that show would do very well. I know a lot of the viewers love the supernatural aspects of Game of Thrones, and the Dunk and Egg tales don't have a lot of that going on. There is Bloodraven, aka the Three-Eyed Raven, in power as the Hand of the King, and some Targaryens with visions, but I don't think that would be enough. A prequel spin-off on The Long Night would be filled with magic and strange creatures, which would be visually appealing. We'll have White Walkers, giants, children of the forest, and probably a lot more like wargs and fire magic. The Long Night took place around 8,000 years ago in a period referred to as the Age of Heroes. This was when the White Walkers came down from way up north and began their war. The show introduced them as creations by the children. When the first men were exterminating the children of the forest and their wayward trees, they resorted to magic that turned a human into a monster. We see this flashback in a Game of Thrones episode, but there's still a lot we don't know. The books explain that the war between the first men and the children of the forest ended with a peace treaty, with no mention of the children turning men into White Walkers. There was also a long period of peace from when the first men and the children signed their pact, to when the White Walkers came down to attack. So what the Night King was doing after he was created, to how he built his army, is going to need to be shown. We know how this story will end, but there's a lot that the writers can do with this prequel. Azor Ahai is one of the series' biggest mysteries, so this character has to have a major role in this show. HBO's explanation says there will be mysteries of the East, which is where Azor Ahai's legend comes from. He was a legendary figure who saved the world when it was covered in darkness. He fought with a sword called Lightbringer that he made by stabbing a sword into his wife's heart. Her soul combined with the weapon and turned it into a sword of living fire. Different areas of this world give this character a different name, but the people of Ahai and the followers of the Lord of Light use the name Azor Ahai. The other popular name is the Promised Prince. It's not confirmed if the legend of Azor Ahai is related to the Long Night, but it does seem like it. Melisandre's mission in Westeros was to look for Azor Ahai reborn to save the world from the White Walkers' attack currently happening in Game of Thrones. She first believed the Promised Prince was Stannis, before running to Jon Snow. The North calls their savior of the Long Night the Last Hero. They say he was the only one to survive attacks from the White Walkers while looking for the children of the forest for their help against this threat. It's going to be an interesting time finding out who will be some of the main characters of this spin-off. HBO also mentions Starks, and the most well-known Stark in history who lived during the Age of Heroes was Brandon the Builder. The legends describe him as the greatest builder, responsible for the construction of Winterfell, the Wall, Storm's End, and the High Tower. These are some landmarks that still stand to this day. The Wall was built after the Long Night to prevent this attack from happening again, so I don't know how old they're going to make this character. The Long Night was a horrible winter that lasted an entire generation, so that'll complicate how old Brandon the Builder will be. This has to be the Stark HBO was referring to because he was the founder of House Stark, making him the first ever Stark. The Age of Heroes has a ton of characters that founded some of the well-known houses. There's a good chance we'll also see the founder of House Lannister, Lan the Clever, who doesn't have a very good reputation. What I'm curious in finding out is if there'll be more than one spin-off that makes it to air. It would be amazing to have 2 shows airing each year, with 10 episodes per season. 20 episodes of Game of Thrones quality TV is asking a lot, but with 2 different teams working on each show, I think they can do it. Jane Goldman is a pretty successful person in the industry, so her show will likely air. Expect this long night show to probably look very similar to the world we see in Game of Thrones. There's been very little advancement in this world over the 8,000 years because of all the wars and magic. That covers this exciting news we were hit with. If anything more is released, I'll be making more videos talking about the spin-offs under development. Thanks for watching, guys.